Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. This is another video in the Meet the Chaosium Team series, and this time it's about Keris. Keris is an associate editor on the Call of Cthulhu line, so she works on Call of Cthulhu content, makes it as exciting and interesting as possible, and I'll let her basically give you all the details. I'll jump across to the interview in just a moment, but first, please remember to subscribe and enjoy.
Right, so I report to Mike Mason, who is the lead for Call of Cthulhu. And my job is, as an editor, I've been given particular responsibility for the Cthulhu by Gaslight new edition. In fact, the first thing that I was given was they basically sent me every file they ever had on Victorian Gaslight Cthulhu, dumped me with a bag of books, said, right, it's got to be 2 rule books instead of 1, bigger, better, go. And that's how I started with Call of Cthulhu at Chaosium. So yeah, it was a big jump. So we've done 2 rule books. We've got a wonderful campaign pack coming up, and a book of scenarios, and we're working on a new Keeper's Gaslight screen as well. And in between that, I do other bits of editing as well.
So the next step would be for me to ask you about your role. Now, there is a little bit of a deceit here. I have a very similar role to you. We're both on the Call of Cthulhu editorial team. But that said, please, I would love to hear the details, your perspective on everything, and of course, for everyone watching.
Right, so when people, authors of scenarios, send stuff in and it is accepted at a higher level, they then land on my desk, as it were. And I have to basically, it sounds terrible, I have to pull them apart. I start with the structural editing, and we'll work all the way up through to line editing and a little bit of, just checking spelling and vocabulary and all that. And then obviously it goes off to it is redone at a higher level as well. So I have a scenario and I have to take it to bits and look at the plot, and does it work? Does it make sense in the setting, the historic setting we've got? Does it make sense in the mythos? Does it make sense psychologically? Would the villain actually be doing that? What clues does he leave? Does it make sense that he'd leave these clues, or are they patently, a trail of clues, or can we sort of tweak them a bit to make them a bit more natural? Does the villain know about the characters? Are they going to fight back? How are the investigators going to follow the plot, and what happens if they go off plot? So I am looking for all the weak points. That's the structural edit, and a lot of the time it's just literally tweaking a few lines here and there, or even a couple of words, just to make it a little bit more viable and more logical. So I look at the logic, and that is actually the thing. As a logic problem, that's one of the things I enjoy most about editing.
How did you actually get into Call of Cthulhu and tabletop RPGs?
Right, I started a long way back in the midst of times. I was 13 years old when I first started role playing, and it was Dungeons and Dragons at school in 1980. So it was a long way back. And at the time, there wasn't as much online stuff available, obviously. Even getting stuff delivered to you was difficult. But what I did get was White Dwarf magazine, and back in the olden days, it covered a range of games. And the bigger ones were obviously D&D, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, and Traveller. So I was reading about Call of Cthulhu before I ever even came across Lovecraft as an author. And then a few years later, I came across, the set of Yellowback Gallant's sci-fi books, and found Lovecraft's actual stories. And I started with At the Mountains of Madness, and then the Case of Charles Dexter Ward, and yeah, mind blown. So impressed, and still didn't have a rule book, not till I got to university and finally had access to a games shop, and I got this is my copy. my very first Call of Cthulhu purchase. And I started with just a one-on-one GMing for someone playing Paper Chase. That was my first scenario.
Editing a scenario and writing a scenario are very different things. What do you like about creating a scenario that you don't really get to do when you're editing it?
I don't see an editing side. Ooh, that's interesting. Because in some ways, there is more overlap than you think, just because we're doing sort of structural editing, and we do edit a lot of content. So I would say, my editing job is very creative, but I would say the thing I like most about actually starting from scratch with a story is I like doing the research. I like finding a setting, preferably something that's unusual and people don't know about historically or just somewhere in the world. And I love doing the research. I love finding out all about it. And then I love meshing my scenario into that seamlessly. So you can't see the join between real history or real mythology and where the mythos comes in. And I find a lot of fun in that.
Same question, but from the reverse perspective. What do you like about editing that you don't get to do in writing?
Well, if you're a scenario writer, you're very close to the thing. So as an editor, I get all these wonderful sort of inventive, creative people sending me their stories. And I sort of get the first look at how they are in the scenario writer's mind. And then because I am working at tweaking it and just the sense of collaboration, I know it probably is quite difficult to look at it from that point of view as a writer, that somebody is taking your stuff and changing it, but we are trying to create the best possible gaming experience, and just bringing all the creative and historical and fact checking and everything together just to make it a great thing even better. That's a lot of fun, and that's a single significant difference between writing and editing is that there's no such thing as editor's block. There is always something to do.
Every role has a bunch of different skills that you need, and some of them people are better at than others. Is there a part of your job that doesn't come to you supernaturally, that you maybe need to be a bit more conscious of or work at a bit harder to make sure that you get it right?
It's very intense. Editing can be very intense. You have like 101 things that you're supposed to be looking for when you're editing. I mean, everything, every single aspect of it has to be brought into your concentration on any given paragraph. Personally, I would struggle with a 9-to-5 block of work. Luckily, Chaosium is super happy with me making my own very weird hours. So I tend to work, in blocks of time. I'll concentrate and then walk away and then come back and, do another block. So yeah, I've just, you can go word blind, it is after you've been looking at something for too long, you'll skip over things which you would pick up if you come to it fresher. So it's a case of just balancing mental abilities to interact with the text. I think that's the challenge.
Can you talk a little bit about some of your favorite Call of Cthulhu products? It would be great to hear where your head's at when you think about something that is really, really fun in the Call of Cthulhu game line.
I loved Horror on the Orient Express. I think it was just amazing. Just the breadth of it, all the different settings and so many different styles of scenario within that campaign. That you had strange, weird ones, and then really combat oriented ones, and there was a lot of body horror. I like the darker end of the mythos, as it were, the sort of more horror oriented stuff. So yeah, just the variety and the sense that you were actually traveling through all these different landscapes. Yeah, it's great.
A bit of a fun question. If you could know to go a dream product, doesn't have to have any commercial viability, just completely, if you had your head and could create something fun for Call of Cthulhu, what would it be?
Well, Gaslight was pretty much my dream project, I must admit. But if I had complete carte blanche, I would like to do Dreamlands Dark. This is not something I'm promising that, you know, there's no sense that this is anything other than off the top of my head, but I would like to take the Dreamland setting. I'd like to strip off all the fantasy gubbins that secreted to it from later authors and return it back to Lovecraft and make it terrifying. That would be my dream.
What other kind of games do you play in general?
I'm actually very fond of LARPing. Not the big sort of fest events, but I do sort of small scale, intense LARPs, which are about the mythos. And I'm also involved in a Victorian Gothic LARP, which is brilliant. And you can see the crossover into my work. So aside from that, I play D&D. I'm in a Deadlands campaign as well, which I enjoy. And I do a lot of sort of tactical board games, things like Gloomhaven and Spirit Island and Pandemic and that sort of thing. Love doing that.
As a final point, could you please share any general advice you have for people who want to be either writers for Call of Cthulhu or editors for Call of Cthulhu?
I would say hit your deadlines and be reliable. There are plenty of talented people out there, but the number of reliable, talented people is considerably smaller. So you've got to be professional. You've got to be reliable.